You're all set.
Thank you. Good morning. This is Kat Chen, Board President of the Oregon Board of Pharmacy. I will now call this meeting of the Oregon Board of Pharmacy to order. Today is Thursday, February 6, 2025, and it is 10:01 a.m. Board of Pharmacy meetings are conducted in accordance with the Oregon Public Meetings Law. Under the Public Meetings Law, governing body meetings are open to the public except as otherwise provided by law. The presiding officer has the authority to keep order and to impose any reasonable restrictions necessary for the efficient and orderly conduct of a meeting. Governing bodies are authorized by RS 192.660 to meet in executive session in certain limited situations, including the consideration of information obtained by a health regulatory board as part of an investigation of licensee or applicant conduct. All official actions by the board must be taken by public vote, and the vote of each member must be recorded. Oregon Board of Pharmacy serves to promote and protect public health, safety, and welfare by ensuring high standards in the practice of pharmacy through the effective regulation of the manufacture and distribution of drugs. The Oregon Board of Pharmacy is also committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging within its organization and for the public it serves. This commitment is reflected in board membership, agency staffing, the services provided, and its efforts to promote patient safety and ensure access to quality pharmacy care. The board encourages review of its full 2024-2026 DEIB plan on the board website. I will now call roll for board and staff. For the record, when I call your name, please verbally acknowledge here. Board President Kat Chen is here. Board Vice President Rich Joyce. Board Member Shannon Beeman.
Here.
Board Member Jennifer Hall. Here. Board Member Rosemary Hemmons.
Here.
Member Amy Kirkbride.
Here.
Board Member Victoria Kroger. Here. Board Member Priya Patel.
Here.
Board Member Anna Pinedo.
Here.
Compliance Officer Joe Ball.
Here.
Strategic Initiatives Manager Chelsea Dasher. Not present currently. Compliance Director Brianna Verma.
Here.
Licensing Director Chrissy Hennigan.
Here.
Interim Executive Director Rosa Klein.
Here.
Operations Manager Rachel Melvin.
Here.
Pharmacist Consultant Gary Runyon.
Here.
Chief Financial and Administrator Officer CG Shelton Forrest. Here. And Board Counsel Angela Hunt.
Here.
Wonderful. Please note that Board Member Hemmons will be leaving our meeting at 3:45, and Board Member Hall will be leaving our meeting between 4:15 and 4:25 today. Public comment information. Public comment will occur towards the end of the meeting on 2/7/2025. The board will not deliberate any issues or requests during public comment, such as formal requests, issues currently under investigation, requests pending before the board, or currently proposed rules. Public comment is limited to matters that were noticed on the board meeting agenda, and comments will not be allowed to be longer than the time allotted by the chair. To sign up to provide public comment, email your request to pharmacy.board@bop.oregon.gov by noon on 2/7/25, or use the sign-up sheet located by the front door. Housekeeping and etiquette. Board and agency staff, identify yourself as board agency staff member, last name each time you speak. Speak one at a time. Raise your hand and have somebody acknowledge to me that you have it raised. When you have a question or comment, we'll silence all devices. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and retained for public record keeping purposes. We will begin with discussion items, starting with Staff Member Runyon and rules and priorities, sir. And thank you.
Share my screen. Oh, no.
Staff Member Runyon. Good morning, everyone. This morning I'll provide an informational presentation on rules priorities. This presentation will create a snapshot of where we are, provide some background on how we got here, and introduce some considerations on how best to move forward as we continue to invest resources in the rulemaking process. I will then open it up for board discussion for that. I know you didn't get this prior to, but I can promise you one thing. this presentation rules. Oh, nothing.
We'll put it in a minute.
But open it up with a little light-hearted, yeah, okay.
Good.
Thank you. Next. All right, and we'll continue by reading the mission statement. The Oregon Board of Pharmacy serves to promote and protect public health, safety, and welfare by ensuring high standards in the practice of pharmacy and through the effective regulation of the manufacture and distribution of drugs. We have a lot on this slide. First, I'll outline the goal of this presentation. It will provide the board with a comprehensive background on board direction as it relates to policy topics and the policy topics ranking list that the board approved at its June 2024 meeting. It will address some potential concerns with the policy topics ranking list pertaining to its alignment with previous board direction, the 2024 through 2029 strategic plan, herein referred to as strategic plan, and certain state and federal regulations. It will propose redistribution of these policy topics to enhance alignment and reorganization in such a way that more accurately reflects workflow. It will set clear expectations and create a consistent approach to meet this direction. And next, I'll provide some context. After reassessing the policy topics ranking list, staff strongly believe that the priorities should be redistributed to ensure both conformity with the board's stated direction and continued alignment with the strategic plan, with the current pharmacy practice landscape, including both pharmacy and non-pharmacy drug outlets. Continued alignment with new legislative mandates and current state and federal regulations, in particular, the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, or DSCSA. Alignment with current membership of the board to include new board member voices. And after that, staff collaborated to contemplate this redistribution, which compromises the basis for this updated recommendation to the board. The product of this redistribution, which you'll see in later slides, will more accurately reflect workflow, improve clarity for the staff, and create more fluidity, flexibility, and efficiency within the processes themselves, all of which are especially critical as we enter into a long legislative session. And lastly, I'll highlight some reasons that staff input in this process has a unique value. For several reasons, staff input may confer additional contextual value when combined with board member ranking, as it includes insights from trends related to phone duty, observations found during routine biennial inspections, waiver requests submitted, investigations, feedback from licensees from other sources, etc. So not only does this insight have the potential to add value, entertaining input from these sources is also directly related to the strategic plan, which we'll cover later in this presentation. And here we have the June 2024 policy topics ranking list as approved by the board in its June meeting in real time with certain amendments. This was conducted via SurveyMonkey, and at various points after the meeting and after the policy topics ranking list was approved, staff has gathered to create a process to implement this direction. During these reviews, it became increasingly apparent that the survey design itself led to results that could not be efficiently implemented. For example, let's take a look at manufacturers, wholesalers, and DDAs collectively and where those rank on the list. DDAs rank at number 6, manufacturers number 7, wholesalers at number 12. It would be more efficient if staff were permitted to group similar categories together and bring those drafts for board review collectively, especially when these categories relate to the implementation of the same law and therefore require revision in tandem. Unfortunately, as it currently exists, the policy topics ranking list does not appear to direct or allow for that, as evidenced by this distribution. And in addition to creating efficiency, the proposed redistribution and reorganization would also address urgency. Due to the impending implementation of the DSCSA, It is imperative that we update our rules to be in alignment with these regulations to avoid causing undue burden or harm to registrants that must remain compliant with both state and federal regulations. Additionally, we must ensure that Oregonians have access to safe medications and avoid the potential barriers caused by unintentional delays. The support of these proposed modifications would facilitate that. And here we have the strategic pillars, the 6 strategic pillars that are part of the board's strategic plan. And again, upon staff review, we realized that the policy topics ranking list was not in alignment with these. And the next slides will review the board's key actions and enforcement plans on them and discuss the discrepancies that exist, giving a few examples for each. This slide represents the proposed execution plan for the registrants pillar for the strategic plan. And in summary, we have goal A and B is to update and amend regulations for pharmacy and non-pharmacy registrants. The key actions for which would be establish clear goals, priorities, and a high-level plan for the pharmacy registrant rule revision process to evaluate and refine each proposed rule amendment to minimize compliance and registration challenges while prioritizing public safety, equity, and access to medication. And importantly, to harmonize existing rules with federal regulations to ensure consistency and alignment, and to identify and address gaps in rules to mitigate risk to patients, support efficient drug distribution, and provide clear operating guidelines for non-pharmacy registrants with federal regulations, specifically manufacturers, wholesalers, and DDAs. To meet the proposed timelines, the board will need to ensure that these topics remain high priority. The approximate timeline to draft and revise these rules is 1 to 2 years. Herein lies an example of this discrepancy between the board's selected action from the strategic plan and the policy topics ranking list. The proposed execution plan for the registration pillar for the strategic plan is to update and amend pharmacy registrants and non-pharmacy registrants regulations, but this came in last place on the June 2024 ranking. And this slide represents the proposed execution plan for the regulation and compliance pillar of the strategic plan. The goal is to continue to refine rule review and revision efforts. Key actions of note: proceed with planned overhaul of rules governing registrants and implementation of recent licensee rule updates and reorganization. Expand opportunities for board review, discussion, and input on rule priorities, rationale, and scoping. Similar to the previous pillar, to meet the proposed timelines, the board will need to ensure that these topics also remain high priority. Similarly, the approximate timeline to draft and revise is 1 to 2 years. This again highlights another incongruence with the strategic plan in that many registrants were not included on the rule review list at all, including nuclear pharmacies and correctional facilities. And from this snapshot, you can see the last time each division was last sustainably revised or updated, and minor revisions are indicated in parentheses. As you can tell, some divisions have not been revised since the 80s, 90s, or early 2000s, while certain facets of the pharmacy practice have evolved more quickly than others. Age isn't a sole indicator that a rule is outdated or no longer applicable, but it does provide another contextual metric that may be helpful in priority stratification. Of note, and I'll start with some of the oldest first. Nuclear pharmacies, 1987. Some sections of Division 41 date back to 1992 and range through 2015. Manufacturers and wholesalers, DDAs, 2015-ish. Prophylactics were 2006-ish. PHE was 2009, and charitable pharmacies 2010, though this is largely directed by statute. All All right, we'll wait for the drum roll here. And we have the recommended prioritization and reorganization. So this supports reorganization of policy topics into a new schema consisting of 5 functional categories: annual, low, medium, high, and intermediate. And the benefits of this system include removing the rigid numerical structure and replacing with a fluid arrangement, which will allow staff to pair and process like sections or components simultaneously, whether these are in the same category or not. This will allow staff to address immediate or urgent needs that come forth related to patient safety or from legislative session. This will provide greater alignment with the strategic plan and board direction by adding a prioritization element based on time since last update. And the annual section will serve as a reminder for updates that occur at a regular cadence, such as updating the standards adopted by reference or working to adopt new rules that are mandated by a legislative session. A great example of this is how staff prioritize research and drafting of pharmacists prescribing vaccines via board direction to ensure timely updates to the protocols. Then at the next relevant ranking, the staff will incorporate that into the policy ranking list if not already completed. Just as we did here, we included pharmacists prescribing vaccines in the high priority section. And I'd like to emphasize that this is a living document, or would be if approved, much like the SDA. We would anticipate that this would be reviewed at least on an annual basis. And it likely makes sense to include as part of the ongoing strategic plan discussions and could be a part of those meetings. If more significant changes are needed, of course, staff would bring those forth to the board. For example, when legislative session is concluded, the staff will need to determine what actions need to be taken. And it makes sense that a prioritization and timeline discussion will need to reoccur at that point. So this begs the question, what essential elements have changed from the approved policy topics ranking list to what we proposed here? So I've just gone through some of the major changes here. The RDSP was removed. We updated the mileage requirements of the distance, the August 2024 meeting. So that's the reason for removal in the reorganization and reprioritization. Drug storage is currently in pharmacies, and we would suggest that this topic be included in the Division 41 revision. And for possible discussion of moving to the Universal Rules Division 104, that way it would apply to wholesalers, manufacturers, CHCs, DIPTOs, et cetera, as applicable. And also to align with the division vision structure the board implemented as part of the 2022 through 26 and 24 through 29 strategic plans. The SPPC and PIC rules are also part of Division 41, and it would make sense to include those with other Division 41 updates. Telework should be revised while revising Division 41 and other pharmacy practice location discussions. Applicability of pharmacist rules in non-resident pharmacies. We combine those and work on those with other topics in Division 41. CDTM, CPA would be in the RPH section. Then outsourcing facilities and non-prescription drug outlets. They're part of the registration pillar, and they should also be in the priority discussion as they've not been addressed or updated in a significant amount of time. Other outlet types for board considerations that were not highlighted in the narrow survey assessment that was discussed at the 2024 policy topics ranking include public health emergencies, HPSP, nuclear pharmacies, animal euthanasia, and prophylactics. Here's a sample of what some timelines might look like, depending on further board direction at this point. So, of course, in the immediate category, these would take precedence over the majority of other revisions, although several things can be worked on in tandem, which is, again, priority or a significant advantage of this schema over the numerical ranking. And as previously outlined, you can see the high priorities relate to the implementation of the DSESA and compounding. And we've been provided with board direction. We need to make some final edits accordingly, which will then require board discussion. And depending on board direction, public comment, this could be completed within the next 12 to 16 months. So depending on board direction at this point, that may put us at summer of 2026. And Division 41, and we deconstruct and align with the division vision, and we can begin working on this alongside the DSCSA updates and compounding rules as time allows. And this revision will likely involve work groups, RACs, significant comment from interested parties, creating a goal adoption in 2 to 3 years. So depending on board direction and when we start, spring of 2027 through 2028. And in the medium priority list, and we can focus on these first that overlap with high priorities and piggyback those where possible. Time to completion would likely be 3 to 5 years. And then in the low priority list, again, emphasizing that this is a living document and that may change, could begin addressing these within 5 years. And that concludes this presentation. President Chen, I'll turn it over to you.
So that
In the meetings.
Staff member Runyon, we'll put it in the meeting summary and we'll load it into the iPads.
you appreciate that. Well, let's begin some discussion then. Go to the round robin. We were gonna start with board member Hall.
Member Hall, most part, I like it. I would like to see the storage up a little higher in priority personally. It's kind of, I don't know, disappointing to see how long it will take to get to it. But I understand the reasonings for, realigning and, for now, I think I understand and I'm fine with it.
Board member Birchard.
I feel similarly to board member Hall. I do like having the categories by priority. That's a nice visual. I do feel like even previously, things around legislative mandates were always moved to the top of the list. I don't feel like that's a change, but it's nice to see everything laid out. I do like the focus on Division 41, as that's a huge division and there's lots in there. Now I understand all the things around supply chain ranking low because it's not very exciting, but necessary work to get done. So that makes sense. I guess I feel similarly that it's hard to look at those long timelines for the medium and low items, but I think realistically, knowing the bandwidth of board staff, it does make sense.
Thank you. Member Crumper.
Member Kroger, what's the objective of this discussion right now? What are we trying to accomplish currently? I'm not quite clear on that. I don't know if that cap.
Gary, my take is that we would like to move from the previous list that we had composed in June of 2024 to consider this as the working document for our priorities. Given the information discussed by board staff Runyon about the difficulty with how it was ranked, how it doesn't fit the strategic plan, and also fit with the priorities that the board staff have to review first.
Gotcha. So we're hoping to finalize that today.
There isn't going to be a vote on anything today, that I'm aware of, but I don't know if we need to even vote to adopt this this document, or what the plan was for how we move from possibly what we did in June of 2024 to moving to this document, if that's what we agreed to do.
Staff member Efremov, I think what staff is seeking today is for direction. So reassessing the discrepancies that were highlighted in the presentation and the new concepts for us to be directed in how to start implementing rule revision writing. So having clear direction from the board. Again, this could be brought back at a future meeting. I don't know that we necessarily need a motion. We just need clear direction of what your priorities are at this time.
Gotcha. Thank you.
That Runyon, just to add to that, I came into this role in August, just right before the board meeting, and we had a rules discussion then, and it was brought up, why aren't we seeing compounding rules, just as an example, and kind of going back to the drawing table and looking at that through the broader context of all of the particular metrics and influences that we've mentioned in the presentation. It became apparent that, again, there were disparities or incongruences between what I heard I should be working on or we should focus on, and then looking at the list, what made sense to work on, where the mandates were, and those things that we felt were higher priority in terms of minimizing liability and increasing or facilitating compliance with all of these regulations that are impending. So that was, I think, the genesis of part of this. So what working on the rules, what I didn't want to happen was to work on those things and then bring them back and then have this continual conversation centered around why aren't we doing X, Y, and Z? So it was just in part opening this up for board discussion and essentially in a way asking for permission to focus on these certain priorities. Because I want to continue working on these in such a way that's consistent with board direction. So that was a main focus, if that makes sense. And also the numerical ranking list itself, if you look at that, it doesn't reflect workflow in that we don't finish number one before we go to number two. And that seems to be implied in the way that is structured. And that's just not the way things work. It's not the way pharmacy practice works in general. And whether you're on this side of things or you're a PIC on the front lines, you might be filling a prescription, doing an MTM, answering the phone, counseling a patient within a 5-minute window. And those are all stratified or have different priorities or different values, but they can be done simultaneously. So that's one of the things that the list didn't seem to allow for. So again, not only are you asking for permission to reprioritize those in a way that makes sense, is also just to work on them in a way that more accurately reflects how we do business on that side of things.
Board Member Kroger, I appreciate you really stepping into this role and like wrapping your brain around like how you're going to move forward with that. I think it makes sense that you're like, hey, I'm new to this role. This is how I see the workflow moving. So I appreciate that. I think it's really important that when there are transitions in team members in any capacity that you reevaluate and look to see what's going to make the most sense, especially for you as you're stepping in and kind of leading the charge on that. So thank you for that. I think personally,
I need to digest this more before I can weigh in and also wrap my brain around understanding your workflow and our priorities and where I personally feel on all of this. I think you've laid it out really well, but I'm not comfortable in saying that I, feel good about it. I think if we go back a few slides, there's still some parts of the process, and I think this strategic, maybe one more, no, forward, sorry. This is the progress indicators. I haven't heard, and I don't quite understand how board staff is working with party feedback, increasing diversity of groups, providing input to the board on rule review, and the process effectiveness. I think I'm still kind of missing that part of the process and your workflow and what that's going to look like as you're working through those rules. And I think that I'd also like to get more input from the public on what was presented as well before weighing in personally. All I had at this time. Thank you.
Yeah. Member Pineda.
Pinedo. I don't do the work you guys do. And so I feel like, it would be putting you in one of our positions and us basically telling you how to do your job. So to be more efficient and to keep the practice of pharmacy safe and to be able to take care of our patients as well as everybody that's in the field. I think if this is what works best and if this is what able to address more. I did not like the number scale. I did feel like that was just like any prioritizing, you have to do this before you can do this. And I do like the fact that this allows you more flexibility to tackle more in one setting versus having to check mark. But I do want to support your position and everything that you present to us. And if it works great for you, then it works great.
I remember Joyce.
Vice President Joyce, so at first glance, first of all, thank you for your hard work on this. I mean, this looks like you put in a lot of time on this, and I appreciate how you compile parts of our list into 41, and that looks good. There are some things that, for example, cold drug storage. If we're going to penalize our registrants for excursions and so forth, you're looking to us for our logic, like, what exactly are your rules? Why are we getting penalized for this, et cetera? So when it comes to patient safety and our registrants, they're looking to us to try to figure out, what we want, what our rules are, and so I do like the prioritization from at first glance. I do wish cold drug storage might be moved up a little bit to the high priority box. But at first glance, it looks good. Supply chain is very important. That's at the top of everyone's conversation as far as pharmacy drug distribution and with 503Bs and all the GLP-1s that are out there. We do need to look at that stuff in our rule. We do need to make sure that that's clear in our rules where we stand on that. And safe pharmacy practice conditions. Those are all high priority items. Compounding, thank goodness, is up there because that's definitely something we need to pin down by the end of this year, hopefully. So I appreciate that. So thank you for putting in your hard work on this. I appreciate the compilation of items in the Division 41 and the priority list. At first glance, it looks looks good. I'm happy with it. Thank you.
Board Member Patel.
Hey, Board Member Patel. So, thank you, Board Consultant Gary, for this one in the put together. But I feel like this is not we talk about in the strategic planning meeting. What I remember, top of my head, and you can correct me and we can go back to notes. We more talk about deregulation. We talk more about pharmacy access. And sorry, this is, I feel like the CDTM and CPA, we done that. We done the peak rule. We done most of the rule. I think we should be more focused on the rule. We didn't even touch it since 2005, like wholesaler rule, like drug rooms, like why we are keep, revisiting and redoing the same thing again and again. And the last time they done say like, hey, we are going to arrange this, we are going to make more streamline and everything. And to be honest with you, it didn't work well because the whole pharmacy community, they're like in chaos because no one couldn't find which rule is where now. So if this time, if you plan to do, can you just go to the slide before? Whatever slide you had, like medium, high, and low priority. Thank you. So let's say if you're going to say like division 41, well, I don't want you to change the whole division 41 in like 1 or 2 or 3 sitting. That's like too much. Yeah, definitely we want to look for the peak rule. We definitely want to look for the standard for inspection for non-resident pharmacy, which we never look for. We never have rule for that. But I wouldn't be comfortable to go back and keep changing these rules again and again. And then I don't think the CDTM CPA, we already done that. To be honest with you, what's supposed to be in the high priority right now in current pharmacy access crisis in Oregon, our locker, kiosk, and the telepharmacy rule. We have only 1 tele or 2 telepharmacy. We barely have any lockers. Just because of our rules, no one even dare to have the lockers and the telepharmacy. So I think that's what we should focus on. And sorry, I need some more time. I have to go back to my notes before even I agree with this high, medium, and low priority. I don't know. How if your goal is more writing rule, then I'm going to say no. Let's just do deregulation and less writing rules. Thank you.
This is Board President Shin. I don't recall our strategic pillars being deregulation at all. I know that has been a prominent part of your.
I think we all agreed upon. We can go back and look in the notes because I have seen in the board too, but you can say the different story or whatever you remember. But I do remember that we shouldn't be more prescriptive. And that was the other board member, not the current board member I'm talking about. We shouldn't be more prescriptive. We should have like, let the pharmacist decide as a professional judgment. So that's just me.
Can go, I think we probably have the strategic plan and what we agreed on at the strategic plan. I don't think the word deregulation was in there. I think that we've all talked about not being prescriptive to the profession to some degree, but I don't think that regulation was the goal of the strategic, was a pillar goal of the strategic plan. We will, if you would like to, after we go through the round robin, we can put up what we did agree on in our last strategic plan. Brady Hampton, please.
Sure, we can do that, but make sure like all notes and everything is there. Like I know we have the sticky notes and all the pictures and everything too. We can go over with that. Yeah. To refresh everyone, because I think these three board members, they are not there as far as my understanding is. Thank you.
Staff member Runyon, board member Patel, thank you for that input. I think one of the biggest priorities for me and what I owe to all of you, and I think what we owe to each other, is transparency. And that is the basis of this presentation and bringing this to you. If you are requesting that I work on rules, which is part of the strategic plan, part of the board direction, when the rubber meets the road and I'm back in my chair, what rules am I going to work on? And in the honor of transparency, what I didn't want was there to be a glaring incongruence between what I was doing and what I was directed to do in the meetings through the strategic plan, et cetera. Because I want to eliminate that sense of bias. Because I'm essentially in this position just an instrument to implement the board's will. So when the rubber meets the road and I'm back in the chair, at some point, I have to reconcile that difference and determine what to work on. So in honor of transparency, this is why, one of the elements or one of the reasons why I was bringing this forth is, just to answer that question, what should I start to work on? And board member Patel, I think we'll get to several opportunities where we might be able to talk about deregulation in the standard of care presentation this afternoon. That's a central element in that regulatory model. So I do hear your concerns as it relates to writing more rules and determining how prescriptive those rules are and how that relates to other regulatory models. But I think we'll have ample opportunity to cover that this afternoon.
Okay, so board member Hemmons.
Thank you, Gary. I appreciate it. And that's, thank you for comment. And yes, that put me a little bit at ease that yes, it's about transparency and I love that. And then we are going to have more chance to discuss on the standard of care and the deregulation. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you. Board member Hemmons.
I was not confused. So I remember that just before the previous board president departed, that there was discussions around what the priorities would be for the board. And I remember having some concerns about the priorities being set by outgoing members of the board. Is this current iteration of the priorities based on that? That list that was discussed and I think probably agreed to by the majority of the board, not necessarily including myself.
I'll go back to it.
Staff member Runyon, we'll go back to one of the previous slides or one of the earlier slides.
I just needed a yes or no. I just want to know if this current iteration is based on that vote that the board took under the previous president of the board. I just wanted a yes or no. I need to go back. Anyway, regarding what board member Patel said, I think it's semantics in terms of terminology. When she says deregulation versus not having so many prescriptive rules and allowing more, relying more so on the pharmacist judgment skills, blah, blah, blah. I think it's the same thing. She may be using the word deregulation, which, has a different, may sound like it has a different meaning, but I think basically she's saying it's the same thing, but it's not. But I get what she's saying. And yes, I do agree that over the course of the time that I've been on this board, there has been many discussions around the fact that there are just too many rules, and it's just too prescriptive. So I I do recall that. I am not a pharmacist, so I can't really get into determining what should be high, what could be low. I can say though that I have listened to a lot of the issues that come before the board, and I do hear, you know, a lot about these cold storage things, a lot. So, I recognize that there may be staffing issues involved. I'm not sure. That's why I was trying to understand where this iteration comes from in terms of what's a priority. But not being a pharmacist, I can't really speak a lot to what should come first, but I can just look at this and say that I would think it would want to mirror some of the issues that consistently comes up before the board. However, I defer to the others on the board who are actually doing this work.
Thank you. Board Member Beeman.
Board Member Beeman. Thank you, Board Staff Member Runyon, for your comment on transparency and wanting to eliminate bias in terms of how you approach the rules. I think that is a necessary statement that has been a few of us board members perhaps have been longing for some time. So thank you for that just the statement alone means that it's in your realm of thinking. I was concerned last June when we did the ranking of the rules because it was immediately before gaining 3 new board members, all of which are knowledgeable and passionate about their service here. So to have 3 voices not being heard on what their priorities would be, it was frustrating at the time, the timing of that ranking. It's also, I think, frustrating now in what we're seeing and what we're talking about meeting to meeting. I also want to highlight the transition in several staff positions since then, and that can realign and take new approaches to things. So I do appreciate this whole presentation and the way it's being looked at and reviewed. Um, I also like hearing some others would like a bit more time to digest this before we make any final decisions, but I do think potentially a new survey or some other sort of final decisions would need to be made based on our priorities. Looking at the slide that's up on the screen now, and knowing and alluding to things we're going to talk about later that haven't been reviewed for a long time, I think a lot of what we have been talking about recently feels like it's been reviewed and reviewed and reviewed and reviewed. So I'm concerned about prioritizing just because they're fresh in our mind, which seems to be what the other list was. The high priority, I think compounding can actually be moved down to low or eliminated given the time we've been working on it and we haven't implemented it. And yes, I've been outspoken against several points in that set of rules. So I just think there are things that are impacting the broader pharmacy that are more important than that. I also think that there are certain rules, cold storage being one of them, that we hear about every single meeting from various board members in various ways that showcase the unintended consequences of restrictiveness in rules, and also how staff voices can lead to potential influence versus having staff input from all staff across the whole board staff, and not just a few key people, but everybody, in terms of what inspectors are seeing on the ground, what investigators are seeing in their work, and what not just compliance, but the licensing team and all the different teams are seeing in the reality of how, because it just feels like we're so and have been so narrowly focused that I I encourage the staff input, but I think at least myself and um, leery sometimes of staff input being equated with staff influence and having presentations or information being presented in a somewhat biased way. Not saying that any of this is, but just speaking from experience here and trying to plant the seed of how to move forward, and how to kind of look through the lens of what the whole staff is saying and maybe not as one person's um, ideology. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Beeman. So I'm piggybacking on what you just said about wanting staff input. I'm just curious about, when you talked about doing a new survey, since we did not have the opportunity to have a survey with the three new board members. And I don't recall that we have ever done a survey of staff on what they see as rule priorities or problems with rules in their divisions like licensing and compliance and what else do we have? And so so you had comments about not wanting to be led, but also wanting to have information. How do you see getting information from staff, to help lead board members on what is most important to start to be working on?
Board Member Beeman, I think in terms of not having board members be led, it needs to be a more comfortable situation to bring up what we see as bias in future presentations. And I think in terms of staff input, I'm going to use, and we're going to talk about it later today, I'm aware, but the licensing fees topic, it hasn't been brought up, and so all of a sudden it's going to be a big impact in terms of the perception from our licensees. And why were certain things focused on so heavily if that was something from that department that might have been uh, an easier lift to do in small increments over these years? And I'm not trying to put any blame on any one person or any department or anything like that. I'm just speaking from my experience and how, looking back on how to make it better. Um, because a lot of what's ahead of us in terms of our high priority, some we've looked at a lot and some we haven't for a long time. So we have a lot of heavy lifting to do in that high priority. And quite frankly, throughout the other priorities, but they're not placed as highly according to our previous ranking. I know with the previous executive director having anonymous, I'm blanking on the word right now, surveys was frowned upon. I understand there are official ones that are we can't, but in terms of just data gathering for stuff like this that's internal, I don't see why, and we can't protect anonymity so people can be a bit more honest without fear of retaliation. And I think having all staff involved in said surveys or whatever implements we use, and I mean, I appreciate that there's a lot of cooperation among staff, but and it just comes from me being a staff pharmacist in a retail setting where when you're in the trenches, what is critical to you and what is a problem to you isn't always seen by corporate as an issue, even though it's widely known as an issue to the people that are doing the day to day.
Board Member Kroger has hand up.
Board Member Kroger, I think, I see an issue with conducting surveys regarding this, and I think Gary kind of brought it up, and what my concern is that we survey the board or we survey the staff and we come up with the list of priorities. But what I heard from Gary was that it doesn't always make sense with what their workflow is and what would make sense for them. And I think I would hate to have the board constantly asking Gary, why aren't we doing this priority? Why aren't we doing this priority? And and who else is helping you with the rules are struggling to make sense of it all. I think the board input on what the priorities end up being should be more of just a collaborative discussion versus just a ranking system of a survey of members. I believe everyone should have kind of that input and should not have fear of retaliation for speaking up on what their concerns are, but then also be okay with when we hear from the staff that, Gary did a great job of lumping together ones that would make sense from an efficiency standpoint. So we can get these rules modernized, get these to a place where everybody feels comfortable, and not necessarily going 1 to 10 in a row, because I don't think that necessarily makes sense. I guess my question is, since I think, like I said, I'm still digesting this, still trying to understand how I feel with this ranking. You've got, what are you gonna do when the meeting's over, Gary? Are we close to, I'm curious, are we close to a first look on some rules that you have been working on based off of the previous direction you've been given? Or are you gonna be going like, oh gosh, what do I do now after these meetings? So I don't wanna put you in that place. I want you to feel comfortable, but do you have work that you can keep working on until we feel comfortable and have that collaborative discussion possibly?
Staff member Onion, I really appreciate the concern and considerations and your awareness of what we, our approach on the other side of things. It means a lot. I'll answer that. I'll also address something that Board Member Beeman said. Number one, I appreciate your awareness, Board Member Beeman, about the staff transitions. There has been a lot of transition within the agency, and I have to applaud the efforts of everyone I work with, because through all of that, every single day we found a way to work together and put the safety and welfare of Oregonians first, despite those transitions and that oftentimes incongruence in direction or diffuse direction. And we always did that. And I really appreciate the staff for that. As far as staff input on this, number two, this was actually the brainchild of and Board Member Patel, you'll appreciate the fact that I no longer call it a weekly rules work group. I call it a weekly group of people working on rules. Because I know that has a specific meaning, so I stopped saying weekly work group. So this list actually represents the influence or at least the input of several tenured members of the agency. So staff member Ball, staff member Efremoff, staff member Lee, staff member Melvin, and so on. And the way these came up, it wasn't a subjective, I think this should be on the list. It was more of an objective, let's take a stroll down memory lane and remember all of the things that previous board council has said should be a high priority. Let's remember and talk about all of the things that previous board direction indicated was a high priority. Let's talk about all of the things related to potential legislative mandates or the impending implementation of federal regulations such as the DSCSA. that might be, indicate a higher priority and so on. So while I am presenting this, this was not, by any means my sole creation, and it had a lot of objective input, from people who represent, quite a significant tenure with the board. Not that there, of course, couldn't be any inherent, bias in that. But I think it reduces the likelihood when, you have a group of people working on this and not just one individual. And I think we've talked about access a few times here. And what I want to point out is access to unsafe medications, is that really access? So this is part of the conundrum that I'm in when I'm sitting in the chair determining what to work on, is even if I have board direction that says, yes, we want to work on these PIC rules, but I know that I can't ensure the safety, health, and welfare of Oregonians if we can't ensure that we're compliant with the DSCSA regulations. And that's a penultimate standard, or will be, for ensuring, the medications are safe. So regardless of how the patients get the medications, how can I reconcile sitting down and working on rules that don't ensure that, when I know that I'm not working on rules, that will. So that's part of it too, is we can talk about access, but really what we mean is access to quality care, is access to safe medications. And I think that's where, the high priority items related to the DSCSA come in.
Wheels turning in people's heads. Like to thank, Staff Runyon and all the staff and the weekly rule people who, helped to objectively review what we have previously done, what has been changing, and putting together a new perspective of how to look at moving forward. Know that, particularly around, what one of the issues Board Member Beeman had brought up about, fees that we will be discussing later. Really moving in a forward direction on how do we prevent where we are today in the future. And having that, that isn't, one of the recommended priorities that are on here either, and I don't even know where that would come in, because this is, different from the rules and different from what we've talked about in strategic plan. But I think part of strategic plan should be, how do we sustain financial viability? That should be part of the board working with board staff on making those plans as well. Otherwise, I think that it sounds like most everybody would like to digest this. You'd like to have a more robust discussion. I assume you'd like to do that in April. But I think the question that Board Member Kroger had asked is, do you have direction on what you're going to be working on now that you need?
Staff member running, previous staff, whose position I filled, Jen Davis, she had a lot of irons in the fire, if you will. So there are definitely items that we could bring forth to the April meeting. And again, we're meeting when time allows. We have a lot going on in the coming weeks, but we're again meeting in the weekly group where we work on rules. So yeah, we definitely have things to work on that we could bring forth.
And I was, not necessarily to you, but to Board Member Beeman, who I was think my eyes got big when you said compounding shouldn't be in high priority and should be in low priority. I thought that was one of the rules sections that we've been struggling with, working on and coming back and back and back and back and back with. Why we would change, why we wouldn't finish that.
This is Board Member Beeman. I think my perspective of how that whole discussion started was a bit biased and a bit anti-compounding and negative towards that very necessary part of pharmacy. Since that discussion started, because it started prior to the last USP update. The new update is in effect. And our rules say to comply with USP. So we, as a board, and in boards past, have given that USP the authority to be the rule set for compounders to follow. And so I feel like, and have felt like, the compounding rules have been an extra set of rules that aren't necessarily increasing access for patients. And from where the rules started to where they've evolved to now with the current iteration we last saw, the bias from the original presentation continued, and compounding is looked at and called out because of very few tragedies in that realm of pharmacy over the last couple decades. But having worked in it in my previous role and worked in it, over a decade ago, nothing is ever talked about access to medications for patients with very specific personalized needs. Nothing is talked about how much it helps people. And so to implement rules that may or may not be more restrictive than USP, but in this case would be, is just putting our patients at a higher disadvantage when USP is essentially the law of the land, according to how that has developed and how boards and it's been recommended for boards to enforce. So that is, there's several parts of the compounding rules that I won't be here to vote on, but already, unless they were edited, I would be voting no on. And so I think that there are, given that USP is in effect, given that compounders should be following it, and knowing the integrity that it takes to compound and to do the best thing for the patient, which is inherently what compounding is because it is so patient specific, and it's not like an FDA approved drug that is mass approved at doses that may or may not work for every individual, because it's serving such a population that is doesn't have other options. I think that in terms of patient safety, there are higher priorities that would be a better focus for us for patients than continuing down the compounding road. And I am just one voice. I'm just one member, and I only have 2 meetings after this, so it's completely moot. But that's just my opinion on that. We have a lot bigger focuses that would improve and support access for medications for people in a lot of different ways, rather than creating more prescriptive rules to follow than what's already existing for our licensees to follow. Thanks.
Thank you. This is for President Chin. I was just very curious with that comment that you had made previously. Think that,
This is Board Member Patel. Sorry, I raised my hand, but I don't know if you guys can see it. But
I see.
yeah, I totally agree with Board Member Beeman, 100%. Yes, that whole presentation, everything is started with the bias. And you don't change a rule, you don't write a rule if there is a need for it. Is the rule is broken, need to be fixed, right? But the compounding, it should be like very low priority. And as you can see from the other licensee too, and then public comments too, I'm with you, Board Member Beeman. The compounding should be very low, and the whole presentation, they give and talking about the facility, it was not even 503A or 503 facility either. So that was just the whole, yeah. Yes, compounding should be on low, and I'm whatever Board Member Beeman said, I'm with it. Thank you.
Board Member Patel. Just as a non-pharmacist, the only thing that I recall being a big issue on compounding was the flavoring, because it isn't an issue.
Board Member Krogers, there are other issues. Can't believe other than
Board-
this.
Well, the one that always struck me was that my Albertsons wasn't going to be able to add flavoring to my kids' amoxicillin kind of thing, and that because they're not following USP. So anyway, so if there are more issues, then I'm not sure how we move forward with the so-called ranking of what the current makeup of the board is in terms of the new recommended prioritization and having I don't know if any kind of survey would address this, or if it's more having a robust discussion. I'm not sure where we go to next.
Member
For
Kirkbride.
both of them, yes.
Great segue. So what I have heard, and being a new board member that's been mentioned a couple times, so I just wanted to comment on this. I think we have been presented with something that is a very good start. I actually think it's a golden opportunity. It doesn't say that we're gonna look at these rules and add words to them or make them more regulated. Like, having the opportunity to look at all of these things allows us as a collective group to simplify them. So I think we do have that opportunity. What I'm hearing is that we also, staff are looking for input where we want to move things. So we've heard a couple comments today. The two things I've heard today are compounding and cold drug storage. And I think we have that opportunity to have those discussions and decide where we want those things. I think it's imperative that we finalize this by the April board meeting. I don't want to see this lingering on. I think it's important for people to take the time, digest, come back to that board meeting with where you want to move things. I have seen, and I was a person who spoke up and said, why aren't the new board members having input on this? Yes, it was based off of the old ranking, but I also saw things were taken away and reasons why. And I also saw things were added, and it's really nice and hopeful to see that we had a discussion so recently about vaccines, and it's on the priority list and it's a high priority. And that tells me that this process is going to allow for that movement. It's not what we're used to, or what previous board members are used to. As far as like being able to take a survey, I don't support going through the process of taking another survey. I think what we'll end up with is a rank, which board staff has told us doesn't work with their workflow. So I think we digest this, we come to the next board meeting with our feedback, we decide where we want to shift things. Or if there's something huge that's missing, if you're a new board member and you feel like you didn't participate in that survey and there's something big, we can have those discussions. But I think that's how we should approach it. And I actually do see this as a good opportunity as a new board member to have input in that process.
this, board member Chin, I think it would be helpful too, to have the strategic plan pillars next to this when we're looking at the whole picture. So that we can meld all of that together. I mean, things, things have changed since the strategic plan. And that needs to be a fluid document as well, but I think it would be, since, staff Runyon had brought up the incongruencies. I think it's important to just know what we had forecasted as our strategic plan at our last meeting.
That's it.
Yes, please.
Board Member Joyce, so, I mean, it is titled recommended prioritization, so it's a recommendation, and he's wanting our input, and I appreciate that. I just want to say in regards to compounding, I'm listening to, Board Member Beeman and Board Member Patel, and, with USP 797, USP 795, I mean, those are safety nets, those are the safety nets, that keeps compounding rules in place for our registrants to follow. And what I want to do is to just finish the compounding rules. And I want your input, Board Member Beeman. I want your input, Board Member Patel, because I mean, your views on with stricter rules may limit patient access. I understand that could happen if we get more strict with compounding rules, and I appreciate that. My perspective is, we use technology, we use what we can to improve patient safety, and I also have worked in IV compounding rules for quite some time, and the use of flow hoods, airflow hoods, the cameras and all that stuff has been an improvement to patient safety. But I understand we also do not want to limit patient access, and with stricter rules, we might do that. So, I mean, I would like to finish up compounding by June, so you can have your input on this. And that's why I think it's a priority, and we should try to finish it up and move on from it. So, also, I do like the fact that prescribing vaccines itself there, because I think that's very important, and that expands patient access. Thanks.
Okay, well, floor is still open for comments. I really appreciate everyone's comments today, and do agree with Board Member Kirkbride about SurveyMonkey not being a necessary item.
This is Board Member Beeman again. I'm sorry. I wanted to echo both Board Member Kroger and Board Member Kirkbride have highlighted how the surveys are ineffective, and I think that's part of what our frustration and what we're up against is we took this survey a year ago with different people and different staff, and it's kind of showcasing that. And I want to applaud the team effort for this. I hope I didn't come off as sounding negative about this document or this new approach. I'm actually very excited about it, and hope that we can keep moving down this path to avoid getting in the crunch situations that we have tended to end up in. So I just want to make sure that I wasn't misunderstood, because I know I can talk very blunt and very fast when I get excited about things. So thank you.
No passion on your sleeve, Board Member Beeman. I am glad that you are excited about this document, as am I. I think it's a much more usable and living document that could add a lot of value to how we see the work being done by this board and board staff. So I really like the working together part.
Board Member Kroger, I'm still not clear on what would be your priorities between now and the April meeting.
Staff member Runyon. So first on the priority list would be bringing this back for this new reorganization and recommended prioritization for some sort of finalized iteration to be approved. As you never, other board members have stated, you need additional time to kind of digest that. And so that would be top priority. Taking a further survey of what rules are close to being presented or presentable, and seeing what makes sense to bring to the April meeting. That would be second. And then third, I think leaving this conversation, I would ask for feedback from you in the interim period while you're digesting all of this and determining what modifications you might suggest. What would you feel comfortable working on, given the context of everything's been presented in this presentation and understanding the priorities? In other words, would it make sense for me in the interim period before the April meeting to begin working on the DSCSA elements, wholesalers, manufacturers, DDAs, et cetera? So I would look for a little guidance.
Board Member Milton.
I just wanted to interject that there are rules that are coming forth for April, like that are standard annual CFRs we have to adopt that need to go to the May rulemaking hearing. So the board will be reviewing, it looks like a large list, but it's all just standards adopted by reference. So there will be rules.
This is Board Member Chin. I thought that the security thing wasn't really an option kind of thing, that we really need to get that done so that everybody knows what to do and what to expect in business. So I don't, does any board member disagree that that's not one of the things that board staff Runyon should be working on in terms of rule? Because there is no current rule, correct?
Staff member Runyon, there are current rules, but there are several elements that aren't necessarily in alignment with the federal regulations. Even things as simple as definitions. What are the definitions of a wholesaler, manufacturer, DDA, 3PL, in our rules where we have them versus what are the definitions in the federal regulations or the SCSA and how that's outlined. So we do have rules, they're just not in alignment with the act and how it will be implemented.
And are you working with the weekly work group people on this one particular?
Staff member Runyon, I will be, yes.
So do you need direction from us today that would be one of the priorities moving between now and April?
Staff member Runyon, yes.
Sorry, I apologize. Gary's been trying to do many roles while trying to do everything with the consultant too. So there are some things that were worked up that just have finishing touches related to compounding most specifically. So if you revisit before Gary took on this role, the board had given direction. You had gotten through all of the compounding rules. And so the revisions from all of those just needed to be implemented and created within the structure and brought back for those discussions. I would highly suggest that that one is closest to conversation with the board. And again, I hear the impetus and the need to maybe make that a priority related to other board members who have really important feedback and content and have been part of this journey, this 2-3 year journey. I can't remember now for compounding rules. We might even have some work group members on the board now, so it'll be helpful to have all of those conversations maybe sooner than later. And the DSCSA is a multi-pronged approach. So you might remember too, about 2 years ago, we changed the laws that were in alignment with the federal definition. So that first phase has already started. And then my recollection, Chrissy, I'm sorry, board member Hennigan had worked with our previous pharmacist consultant on starting the foundation for the different manufacturer, wholesaler, and DDAs. Maybe you could just share a little bit of work that's already been started on that.
Staff member Hennigan, yes, as Consultant Davis and I worked on those. We looked at the NABQ model rules. We looked at the DSCSA, started working on some of the definitions. We got input from the licensing staff on the licensing challenges of our rules currently, where clarity needs to be made. So we have made, we had to have a good start on those rules.
That's just to circle back on some things that we have been working on that would be an easy transition to keep building on that structure. If the board will is that, and we can also do whatever the board decides. But that would then give the time for us to bring this back and have things to work on while you're marinating on how you want to redo the rules priority.
So thank you. So what I'm hearing is that we should probably have compounding in April to review that again, and that the board direction is to, it's just like you are always working on multiple things at the same time. The drug security thingy is always kind of being worked on by each department, how that's moving forward is what it sounds like. So that's, am I correct in that assumption? You're doing more than one thing at a time. You are working on all of that.
No.
Staff member, all those are in progress. They have been started. Did you want to add something?
Yes, staff member development. So we definitely don't want to overpromise anything. I don't know if we would be able to review an entire newly proposed Division 183 compounding during the April board meeting, but we will do our best. And the only reason I point that out, we also have a temp rule that we have currently that we currently adopt. That's Division 115, and then the standards adopted by reference. That's Division 6, 41, 43, 80, 45, let's see, 115, 120, 135, 139, and 141 all have to be amended. And that's again are the standards adopted by reference that we do every year. So what that means is Consultant Runyon has to go and pull all those references down from all of the proper places. And then we have to amend every one of those rules I just mentioned. Does that make more sense, like for logistics? So you realize how it took us 24 months to review that entire proposed compounding set of rules during that time. Each board meeting, it would be very difficult to review the entire set, is what I'm going to just throw out there. But we'll do our best.
If we don't review the entire set, is there a particular part of the rule that we were doing more work on that?
Staff member Epermoff, I think what we can do from this discussion and just for sake of trying to understand direction and priorities, we can do obviously what we have to do every April to do the standards by reference. Those are required to be updated. We could get the changes implemented from the direction for the compounding rules. I think the difficulty with that is that we can't get the entirety done, but we will try our best. That the issue that staff member Melvin is maybe raising is, will the board have enough time in the board meeting to discuss it? So we definitely can prepare that information, and obviously if there isn't enough time that could be carried over, I would anticipate that discussion will probably be multiple board meetings anyway. So I wouldn't foresee doing all of that in one board meeting, but we sure as heck can try.
Staff member Melvin, that's also assuming the board is not anticipating sending compounding rules to the May rulemaking hearing, which is not what I think we were discussing, correct?
Board member Kroger, to clarify like my line of questioning, I just wanted to make sure that you guys weren't just sitting in a chair for the next 2 months. No, like I'm not expecting necessarily that. I just want to make sure that you guys aren't spinning your wheels. Still not quite sure what, come back and suddenly we're all mad at you. So I don't think that was ever our expectation. So don't worry about making promises that you feel like you're going to be disappointing us. I just want to make sure that, and it's okay if we, in my opinion, it's okay if we don't necessarily see those as long as there's progress being made, right? I don't think that there are hard deadlines except for the adopt by reference, or if there's other, who knows what's coming through the legislative pipeline or federally that we're mandated to do. And I think that that's something that I understand can shift what we end up finally seeing at the end of the day here in front of us. So don't don't lose sleep over this conception.
Thank you. I would agree.
So this is Board Member Patel. So you are saying we are going to revisit compounding rule in the April meeting? Did I hear it right?
It is a tentative. It just depends on what time frame there is with all the other things that we are necessarily having to do.
So I just want to make sure, please don't send the entire package of compounding and expect every licensee to go through again, because I do remember, it's like it took us like more than 12 months, 24 months. And people are not going to remember. Then make sure like we also send out that, hey, we are doing this one again. Make sure like send the public comment, and we have to accommodate those comments in the upcoming meeting instead of not disregard those public comments, whatever said in the past. I just want to make sure, and I want like, I feel just send out enough that whatever time we are going to have, like instead of having the whole division and then we don't have time, and then licensee and myself also, that if you're not going to have time, if we know that, then just don't do it, but don't rush it. And that's the problem I have with the board, that do not rush it, make it right.
Noted, thank you. This Board President Shin. And nobody here on staff or any board member wants any rule to be rushed, so. And I think we have made a commitment to paying attention to public comment. I think we all get it. We all have it on our board iPads to read and really consume and understand what the concerns are, which I have always valued. So is there any further comment then? I think we have some direction to board staff, and we have a lot to consume. And I agree with Board Member Kirkbride about coming to, well, I think our time should be spent probably, rather than trying to bring compounding rules in April, is really looking at this document and having that robust discussion about where we see priorities with the current membership of the board. Does that sound like a better idea? Because I given what board staff Melvin has listed about what we already have to do, and then we're talking about a day and a half, because usually we do a day and a half of discipline. We have a day and a half, which that's not a huge amount of time, and so I think having the robust discussion about process of ranking and aligning with the strategic plan and having that are the biggest part of a robust conversation is what I would like to see. And rather than the compounding, I don't think that it just doesn't sound like there's enough time to do all of that without feeling rushed.
I agree with that, Board Member Chin. That's what my point was. So thank you. Put it together.
Yeah, we need to do this document first and come prepared with what we would like to see and have a transparent and open conversation about where we go to next. So that help? Okay. Right, so we are at where we needed to be. Need a quick bio break. I'm sorry, we're only here for 2 hours, girlfriend. Okay, quick bio break. Quick bio break. When people come back, we will resume. It's 5 minutes. For me to be on time, for me to be.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you
Thank
say
you,
5-minute break?
Board staff, Runyon, yeah, 5-minute break.
Okay.
Staff member Runyon, thank you all.
I was, it's good, try.